Try Cora's cult favorite period products without joining a cult. Cora offers modern period products like whisper-thin pads and liners with a breathable cotton top sheet and tampons made with 100% organic cotton. And with a full range of absorbencies, Cora's got you covered from heavy flow to barely there days. Try Cora today for a more comfortable period, clean and simple. Find Cora nationwide at Target, CVS, and online at cora.life.
From the Arizona Daily Star and Tucson.com, this is the Wildcast.
And here we'd go.
Oh, I like it.
Like the intro, it's a little bit different than a normal episode of the Wildcast podcast. I'm Justin Spears. You guys know me. And I'm here with Edward Celaya, host of Here We Go.
Here we go.
And Edward, you started this podcast, and you've already produced how many episodes?
13. Lucky
episodes,
13, man. Yeah.
So you've been at it for a little
over 2.5, 3 months now.
Now you got a baker's dozen batch of episodes.
I do.
And we're going to feature one of your episodes here coming up in just a little bit. Your most recent interview with Chicago Bulls champion Craig Hodges. Yeah. And, the purpose of your podcast, Eddie, is to educate, inform cannabis and the industry and how it's growing. And you talked to Craig Hodges about diving into the cannabis industry as a pro athlete. So for our listeners, what can you tell us quickly about the interview with Craig Hodges and what can they expect?
Number one, you can listen to that interview at Here We'd Go, and you can stream it at all of the major streaming services. But yeah, what you can look for in that episode and all the episodes of Here We'd Go is just kind of great interviews having to do with folks that run the gamut in the marijuana industry. And that particular interview with Craig, we really focused in on what cannabis culture was like throughout the NBA from when he arrived in the early 1980s to when he left as a coach about 5-8 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's funny. You would think like, oh, they were really strict, like, Reagan era and everything like that. But
I think like during that time, weed is very taboo in the 80s.
It was, but the NBA had a bigger problem with cocaine and other harder drugs.
It is
so
the 80s.
So they may have tested for it, but it wasn't really something that was on the front burner, if you will.
Sure.
It wasn't really until the 90s and 2000s that he said that's when they were testing everybody for that. He did mention that if anybody who was a star ever did, unfortunately test positive for marijuana, it was usually something that they wouldn't have, the league probably would have said like, oh, hey, like handle this within your organization, make it so that like, it seems like there was an injury or something like that the first time. So if like a Kobe, if you will, ever tested positive for that, it might have been a 2 or 3 games. Oh, his knee is acting up or something along those lines.
So the league did a pretty good job of protecting its players. We're like the NFL, for instance, like Josh Gordon is like the poster child for testing positive for marijuana.
Uh-oh.
They were going to put you on blast. They're letting the world know we're suspending him for this many games because he tested positive for marijuana.
Yeah. The NBA was still very publicly facing like, hey, like we are testing. We do not want our players. And I'm sure there were, lower level players that probably did suffer some actual consequences for that. But according to Craig, if a star had tested positive, they would have been like, hey, let's keep this under wraps here.
For sure. And how would you also kind of describe the evolution of cannabis within sports from your perspective? Because, in the NBA, we hear about like 85, 90% of the NBA consumes marijuana. Now we're talking about the UFC. They've loosened their restrictions. It just seems like, once upon a time, it was always told, hey, don't smoke weed, this is bad. Uh-huh. And now professional sports leagues are like, okay, this is not too bad.
I think the big change, I think the NFL is really it's going to have to be the next one that the domino that falls for there to really be a big change. But I think the big thing is opioids, and athletes pushing back against, hey, like when I was an athlete and I had an injury, the doctors would just say, take this pill or two,
For sure.
go out and play. I think there is a big pushback, not just from the pharmaceutical or medical industry against using those sort of, I guess, treatments to work through pain. And now athletes are saying like, hey, I get maybe not as like great pain relieving results, but the actual stress and negativity from that pain, I'm able to deal with better with cannabis than I would be if I were to be taking these pills. So I think that has been the big push, both in society and in sports over these last, 5-8 years. You've really seen a difference.
And it's also crazy that, us being here in Pac-12 country, we're in a conference, and again, we don't know what the future of the conference holds. But you think about it, Arizona legalized, Colorado legalized, California, Oregon, Washington. The only state that hasn't legalized it is Utah.
And Utah has a pretty strong medical program too.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're right. Yeah.
So I'm like, man, could we ever get into a time where cannabis has become so impactful that it's now getting into – now, it's a little bit trickier here because you're treating patients who are 21 and older.
Yes.
So a lot of these kids are older. Mm-hmm. But could you envision maybe cannabis getting into college athletics?
I totally could. And the way I see it happening first is kind of what you see with betting. You saw teams and leagues actually using betting as like, hey, you guys can advertise on during our games. And now you see partnerships where like even the Suns and Diamondbacks have a sports book that you can come to in downtown Phoenix, and it's branded and licensed as part of the Arizona sports betting.
And if you said that even 10 years ago,
you'd be like, no way. Somebody would have to go to prison for something like that.
Yeah.
I think that you'll see sponsorships probably at like the team level first, probably at like in professional sports, but within college sports, I could totally see it happening within the next decade.
Yeah, I think it'd have to start at pro sports first.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah, most definitely.
All right, now for the moment we've all been waiting for, Edward's interview with Craig Hodges, man. I'm super excited, man, and we appreciate you for allowing us to feature this, man.
I'm really appreciative that you guys would have me on here, and I think it is something. This is a topic, cannabis in sports, that. I mean, with Brittany Griner, I've got an episode that folks can listen to that deals with that as well.
No kidding.
There's always intersections. And like we just talked about just right now, this is just one of them. So
Absolutely.
Hopefully you folks enjoy this, and here we go. How's it growing, folks? Welcome to the latest episode of Here We'd Go. We're coming from you a little bit outside of the Arizona Daily Star studios today. We're here at Arta Bella on 4th Avenue. It's a local paint and puff place, and we are joined today by a very special guest, Craig Hodges. Craig is a legend, basically, in the NBA. He is a 3-time winner of the three-point contest, 2-time NBA champion as a player, 1 time as a coach, if I believe,
Twice
right?
as a coach.
Twice as a coach. Wow. So, Craig, tell us a little bit about why you're here today.
Well, first of all, just thank Almighty God for giving us a chance to come across the airwaves and, fellowship. And for me, when I talk to James about what you guys were doing, it's always something that, for me is to be able to unify with people of like minds. And when we talk about cannabis, I think, it's similar to what Bob Marley says, in the leaves are the healing of the nation. So, based upon those principles that I learned probably when I was 18, 19-year-old college student, they've stuck with me for a long time. And now with the evolution of where cannabis has come from the standpoint of it being something that when I was a young man in high school, when I first had my first experience, it was one of those things that it was illegal, and it was frowned upon in so many circles. But at the same time, for me, it was something that made me feel comfortable. It made me, a lot of people, it was a downer to some degree where they would smoke and it would be, but for me, it was one of those things where it was almost enlightening that it took me to a different headspace, so to speak. And from that standpoint, I've been a cannabis brother for a number of years, so to speak.
Well, tell me a little bit more about those first experiences then. About what age was it?
I probably was a junior in high school, and it was a girlfriend of mine that was a smoker, and I wasn't, and that was my first experience as far as having relations to a degree, and from that point on, it was like it must be something cool with this. So I'm one of those brothers who grew up with Rick James, and I'm in love with Mary Jane. And so it's one of those things for me that it was a different spectrum, and at the same time, it was all about being able at that time where it wasn't as visible as it is today, that you had to be able to compose yourself and compart yourself in a certain way so that you would be able to compete and you wouldn't get kicked out of school and it wouldn't be all of that dumb shit that was going on at that period of time. Where now I think it's a different, and I think for a lot of young people, it gives them an opportunity to relate to other people's miseries and pain.
So tell me then a little bit, you started your high school career in the Chicagoland area and went to school at Long Beach State. Right. Tell me about that transition. What was the change, number one, in your basketball career, and what was the change in cannabis culture like?
Well, for me, dealing with the cannabis side first, in Chicago at that time in the 70s and early 80s, we were getting nothing but Mexican brown weed. So it was almost looking like it was just a clump of soap. That's what we used to call it. You're almost getting you a bar of soap, and then when you break it up, it was more crunchy. It wasn't, and until when I got to California with one of my teammates from Redondo Beach, that I learned what a bud was. I never knew that where I came from, anything that looked like that, it was homegrown, and homegrown was garbage where we grew up at. So the first time I experienced it in Long Beach State, it was an eye-opening experience to say the least, and it was pleasurable from the standpoint that it was tasty. It didn't taste like, when we smoked in Chicago, it tasted like dirt. It was dirt weed compared to, you had different flavors, Maui Wild Weed, a Thai stick. It was all type of, different strands that at that time we were just experiencing it for the good buzz that you got, not realizing, the unique opportunities that would come along within the cannabis industry later on.
So we touched definitely on that cannabis side of being at Long Beach. You actually played for the architect of the Triangle Offense at Long Beach, Tex Winters.
Yes.
What was it like from a basketball standpoint, kind of playing for who would be a eventual legend? Right. And number one, how did your career start developing from there?
Well, for me, I grew up in Chicago Heights, and my family was a family of sports. My granddad was the park director, so all of these sports programs, my granddad was over. So I grew up in a household where sports and my mom and her sisters were all sticklers for education. So I had a student athletic mentality early in life, and then having a chance to be groomed by my uncle, who was a great basketball player, rest his soul, and having a chance to go to Rich East High School where Steve Fisher, who was the coach of the Fab Five, that was my high school coach. And so it was a certain discipline that I had in sports from the time I came on the planet. And when I had a chance, my senior year, Tex Winter was recruiting me for Northwestern. And he got the job at Long Beach in March of my senior year. And that gave me opportunity to come to the West Coast. And for me, it was during that era of John Wooden basketball where UCLA was winning everything. And in Chicago, we're seeing UCLA, palm trees, girls in mini skirts, and they walking around in the sunshine, and I'm sitting in Chicago in minus 18 degrees and 20 inches of snow. I said that's where I wanted to go to school. So when Tex got the job at Long Beach, I and a good friend of mine, Phil Gary, who went to an opposing high school, we were his first recruits. So for me, it was an opportunity of a lifetime to be able to come to school and study the game under, perhaps one of the greatest minds in the history of basketball, Lord rest his soul, and the Hall of Fame career that, that he was able to create from being able to understand the game from a different perspective than anyone else. And so when I look back at, the championships that Phil Jackson won, And the difference between what I got at Long Beach State, I got 4 years of nothing but triangle, from everything from the inbound to, 94 feet of triangle, where on the NBA end, you only have to use, half of that. And when we're talking about half-court basketball. So you look at Phil Jackson and winning all the championships that he won, he's only won it with a third of the system. And then when I look at what Steve Kerr and, different coaches have used from the system, Steve Kerr as well as Popovich in San Antonio, they were all, really Tex Warner disciples in as far as seeing how court space and player movement and ball movement, how it relates to the game and how it can only impact the team from a positive end. Because what we found in Chicago is that the more touches that Scotty, Horace, Bill, and everyone else got around Michael, the more we played defense better. And I think that lends itself to that if you're going to get a chance to score the ball, you don't mind going down, defend to get the ball.
Well, we're definitely going to touch more on your years in Chicago, but I want to go back to kind of those college years.
Yes.
What was the approach from the NCAA and from Long Beach there to cannabis use by athletes at the time? Were there tests?
Once again, no, it wasn't any testing. It was just one of those things where, I remember, and I'm shooting my documentary should be out in the next 8 months or so, and one of the scenes is they're interviewing my college teammate who I told you about. His name is Kevin Ty, and he's reflecting on, we go to play Marquette in a big game in Marquette, and before we even get on the bus, we all talking, getting nice, and it wasn't anything we didn't do any other game, but this game, we out there and we're making a ass of ourselves, right? So we're down, getting kicked, and Tex stands up and calls a timeout, and we come to the bench, we thinking it's just a normal timeout, and he says, "Man, the administration tells me I have a team full of potheads." and for me, I'm a freshman, and I'm like, oh man, I'm getting ready to get kicked out of school. And he points to my boy, Kevin Ty, the brother from Redondo, and he says, "Kevin Ty, they tell me you're the ringleader." And then I guess I was looking at him a certain kind of way because Kevin is my boy. And he's like, "Craig, you don't like me talking to your boy like that, do you?" And we was just like, all right, man, let's go on out there and play. But Tex was always, and another point that he made, he said, during that timeout, he said, "You guys, you know what that marijuana does to you? It puts you in a state of euphoria." "You don't think I know about that? I've studied it." I was like, "Yeah, Tex, you must have been burning too."
So then it really wasn't really enforced. There was no enforcement that hey.
No, it wasn't anything like that. And I think the biggest part was, and I tell people a lot of times when you look at what college was really your last time to experience without responsibility. Totally. You feel me? So you're in an insulated situation where they let you experience everything right there in that little bubble, keep it in this bubble, and you be cool. And I think that was pretty much how I was during that period of time. I think more than anything it was self-restraint, and as opposed to it coming from the outside. But then you had those guys who would go overboard, and you seen the consequences of it. So my thing always was to make sure that you didn't eliminate yourself, and that's one of the things I tell young athletes is that you're going to get injured. That's a possibility of hurting your career, but don't let it be because of some stupid shit that you do. Whether it be you not staying on top of your books or whether you're not being a consummate citizen on campus. So that was the biggest thing for us, is that during that period of time, and you have to think about where I was at too, man. I was in Long Beach, California, and California is always ahead of the curve on societal issues, and marijuana wasn't any different during that period of time. That everybody knew that it was. The best bud was probably from Humboldt County. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly,
so,
just up the street, basically.
So people would roll up to Humboldt on the weekends, and then when they come back to campus, it was on and popping. You would get your Maui from Hawaii and all of that kind of stuff that came in pineapple cans and all of that kind of stuff, good stuff. So it was great memories and good experience. And where I see it at now, it's a lot more relaxed than it should have been all the time.
So you spent your 4 years there at Long Beach.
Yes.
You were drafted by the San Diego Clippers at the time. What was the transition to the NBA like, first as a player, especially you as a shooter? I think a lot of my listeners might not know that the three-point line would have just been introduced
right
before your career started in the NBA.
No doubt about it. And
talk a little about that.
Yeah, and you know, for the biggest part, I tell young cats is that when you playing the game, every level from elementary school to junior high to high school to college, every level that you go to, the game gets faster, the players get stronger, and the players are more skilled. And it's no different. So my first game as a rookie was against Magic Johnson. And just the sheer physicality of playing against a 6'9" point guard. You know, I was mainly a point guard that could shoot. So I had a lot of – coming out of college, I was a point guard. So I had to initiate offenses and play against other point guards. And, you know, the reality of playing against a 6'9" point guard for the first time in my life, and it being Magic Johnson, it was one of those – you know, eye-opening experiences where you have to catch yourself and not catch yourself watching, but catch yourself reacting to what the moment is. And I think that was probably the biggest step is, you know, realizing that you are where you are and not being enamored by the fact that you are in the NBA, but knowing that you're there for a reason and that you belong. And I think that's the biggest emphasis for me, especially as a rookie with the Clippers, man. We weren't going anywhere, but you couldn't tell me that. And I think that was one of the coolest things. I recall my rookie year, we were 18 and whatever it was, and it was the last game of the season. And I'm in the locker room on hype mode, right? And Bill Walton looks over at me and say, Hodge, man, this is the last game of the season, and we're not going to the playoffs, dude. Relax. So for me, it's always been the sport itself, you know, just playing and getting the chance to play in front of people on that level that you dreamt about was something that was always exciting, and it continues to be. And I think, you know, in looking back at it, the experience with the Clippers was kind of duality of it. It was a duality of being able to be a professional, but being in a franchise that wasn't high class and quality, you know, and then being able to go from there to the Milwaukee Bucks and seeing the difference in how organizations should be run, how well they maintain the environment around the players, and they make it where you want to come and hoop. And I think that was one of the things in San Diego that was kind of crazy. And that's to this day, it fathoms me that they don't have a team down there. It's a beautiful city. It's a great location, and I think the fans would support it if you went about marketing it properly.
Amen. And the sports arena is basically like a knockoff almost of the Inglewood, the old Forum in Inglewood.
No doubt about it.
So, you talked about the transition for your game to the NBA. Mm-hmm. What was the approach to cannabis? What was the cannabis culture in the NBA at that time?
When I came in the league in 1982, it's only two things that they tested you for: cocaine and heroin.
Because there was the big scandals before that.
That was what's so wild that it wasn't anything about you smoking weed. You know, it was more making sure that you weren't on anything white, and that was the crazy job that would get you in trouble. And for me as a rookie, I had some great players around me who were veterans, who taught me the ropes, who taught me, man, you can do your thing, but you got to be ready to go. And that's the biggest part, I think, of regardless of what industry you're in is, you're going to have your lifestyle. But how well does your lifestyle blend into what your profession is? And when you put professional in front of your name, it's a certain expectation that comes along with that. And I think, it's no different in sport. And for me, in watching the game now, the game is a lot more commercial than it was when we played. And that, you had those superstar players. Like I think about it when I came in, Bill Walton, Terry Cummins, Tom Chambers. They were the players who were
stars,
marketed,
if you will. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? And you have maybe 5 to 10% of the league that's really marketed like that. And that's the part where being within it, you look at it from a different standpoint, that you actually see the tiered system that it really is, that the superstars have a thing, the stars have a thing, and then the role players have their position, and that it's paid accordingly.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
That is very apparent.
Yeah.
So you spent a few years with the Clippers, the Milwaukee Bucks, and eventually you end up kind of back home with the Chicago Bulls. Mm-hmm. Talk about getting back to the Chicagoland area. What was that like for you personally on a personal level? And at that point, where did you see your career kind of going?
Well, the biggest thing was the realization that when I got traded from Milwaukee to Phoenix, that it was just a matter of Chicago not being able to trade me, Milwaukee wouldn't trade me 90 miles down the road. So they sent me west. And when I got to Phoenix, in fact, I was leading the league in 3-point percentage. And that was the same day Kevin Johnson, Tyrone Corbin, Mark West, all of us got traded the same day into Phoenix. So when I get to Phoenix, as soon as I get off the plane, I'm on the injury reserve list. And I'm like, I'm not hurt, but that's the politics of the game. And, not realizing until the following training camp that I wasn't going to play. And I might have played 5-10 games for Phoenix over almost the end of one season and the beginning of the next season. And I got traded to Milwaukee in probably the first third of the season, around November, December time. And it was a breath of fresh air for me, man, to be able to come from Milwaukee to Phoenix, and then from Phoenix to Chicago, and come to Chicago at a point in time when they brought me in to, quote unquote, Michael needed help. So I came in backing Michael up, which was cool because every time he came out the game, I got to go in and shoot every time. You know what I'm saying? But eventually I was able to move into the backcourt with him. And we were able to, manufacture some wins that were, memorable. The shot against Cleveland was one of them.
So you were obviously there during those first two championships. Yes. With Michael Jordan, with, Scottie Pippen comes on. You've got Tex Winter there, your
Absolutely.
old coach.
No doubt.
Can you kind of describe what that's like to our listeners, to me, because I almost kind of look as those teams as like the Beatles.
No question about it.
You guys were the biggest stars of my life growing up.
Man. And I appreciate that. And all of us, to a player, they heard you say that, they would tell you appreciation, because the thing as a player, you never know when you're going to win. And there's so many great players that never won a championship. I think, namely Charles Barkley, right? But the biggest part about winning is that it's a chemistry that is built over time.
Tell us then a little bit about what was the cannabis culture on that team like? You don't have to name names Michael does.
No, I would never do that. I just speak for myself, because honestly, in that squad, you had certain, like anything else in business or any office situation, you have certain people that you're close to. You know what I'm saying? And for me, I used to, on the road, I would burn by myself, but then I go hang out with the fellas after I get my burn on, and see what's going on. But, for the most part, people really kept it to yourself, and I think, you had a couple guys, I'm sure. Scotty was doing his thing, him and Horace. I don't even know if Horace burns, but, it was certain young, and Horace and Scotty, they were really the life of the party, as far as our team was concerned, because they were the young cats who were, every day they would make you laugh about some silly shit that they would do. And it was cool, because within that, they were continuing to learn on a professional level, and their games were getting better at the time. So, for me, you knew MJ was smoking his cigars, what was in his cigars. You know what I'm saying? So it was a situation where we had a ball as a team, because everybody, and I think that's one of the coolest things when chemistry comes together, everybody respects everybody's space. You feel me? And everybody respects what you bring to the table. And when we cross those lines to do our jobs, we cheer for one another, and we know how to get each other off. And I think that's the biggest thing that, you look at Golden State and what they've been able to do is they understand everybody's positions and roles. And when one of them get on the road, they try to milk that until it's over.
So talk to me a little bit about your visit to the White House in 1991. And along with that, talk to me a little bit more about your activism and being politically and socially active.
Well, for me, it's like I said, I grew up I'm a baby of the movement. June 27, 1960, I was born. My mom born into a household that was part of the movement. Yeah, and once again, I tell people, for me, it was a culmination of my life, man, and, knowing what my mom and the freedom fighters in her day who were, moving. For me, I'm a 70-year-old kid running around in Chicago Heights, knocking on doors, giving out flyers for voter registration, and voters' rights and that kind of stuff. So the redlining of communities, I was part of seeing that change and seeing my mom have a particular and very concentrated portion in that. And it was always fun for me to sit in between her and the president of the organization and see him bark out orders and grown men get up and jump up and go to moving after he done cussed them out. And I'm like, man, if that was to happen today, it would be a beef.
Totally.
Know? So it was something that I saw as far as live leadership was concerned. And it was, it was something that really lit a flame in me. And as far as that's concerned was the day that Dr. King was murdered, coming off the school ground, hooping, having a good day. And it was a I get chills thinking about it now. It was a wail. You could hear it in the community where everybody got the word at the same time and everybody cried out at the same time. And that, for me, walking in and seeing my granddad cry was something that I had never, what could make my granddaddy cry? He was tough as nails, you know what I'm saying? So when I seen that, I said, man, I have to study that man and see what it was in him that could make not only my granddaddy cry, but the entire community. It was something about him that was special. And for me, having a chance to go away to school and study it and then have a chance to, realize that when you're in a position of visibility, celebrity, all that, whatever you want to term it, you have a certain and unique opportunity that the common person who may not have had that skill set to be able to approach people on a level that most people wouldn't. So when we went to the White House after winning our championship, I had worn dashikis from the last time Detroit beat us. So when we left Detroit, I said to myself, man, we need the ancestral help. So the following season, every playoff game I wore a dashiki. And as a sports community, you're ritualistic. Man, Hodge, you won that dashiki. You got another one? Oh, man, I got enough of these for every day of the year. So that's not a problem. So it wasn't a problem of people seeing me in the dashiki during the playoff time, but now we were in the international stage. And a sister in Chicago, made me a nice white one. And I was going in total respect of my ancestors first, because when we go to an event of that magnitude, we have to go in our garments that are culturally correct and carry a purpose and meaning. And that purpose and meaning is peace and friendship. That I didn't go to the White House as a militant like everybody played it out to be. Craig Hodges is a militant who delivered a letter to the president telling him to stop the war. Nah. The letter that I wrote to the president was about poor people who have been disenfranchised. And lastly, I talked about black people, because I know that our oppression has been like no other on the planet, but at the same time, I'm not belittling the oppression of any people on the face of the earth. Getting that chance to be in a position to speak on behalf of people, I think that was one of the coolest days of my life, man.
So how did the NBA take that gesture?
Well, to this day, it's one of those things that, for me, from a speculative end, because nobody who was within the league at that time on a hierarchy level who's able to say, well, Craig Hodges, this is why no one, 1992, I was the number one shooter in the league, won our second championship, and the following season I couldn't get an agent to represent me. Unlike Colin Kaepernick now, who had, along with this, and that's what I tell people, social media, being caught up into the groundswell of the Black Lives Matter, so one of the lessons I learned was from Dr. John Carlos, who was 1968 Olympics. And he taught me that, the biggest thing is if you're in a movement, if you're caught up into a movement at the time that you're doing what you do, then it's a lot more magnified. So they were caught up into the movement of the 60s. Colin Kaepernick was caught into the Black Lives Matter as well as social media. So he was able to get a lot more traction that during that period of time, no one would even talk to me about, why I'm not playing, it was none of that. So in 1992, after the season was over, Bulls released me July 1st, 1992, and it was persona non grata from that point. My union tells me who I paid. Well, we paid $3,000 a year for a 10-year career, so I paid $30,000 in union dues. So I should have some type of representation at this point in time. But what I was told by my union is that we need to find you an agent that a team owes a favor so they'll know that you're not a bad guy. And at that point in time, for me, the only thing that I could consider bad was, the perspective of someone would have of me going to the White House and giving the president a letter. Other than that, I've never been fined. I've never been late for a plane, bus, none of that. I was player representative for all 4 teams that I played for, unheard of as a rookie. So for me, it wasn't a matter of what I did wrong. It was a matter of being silenced in a way that, it was economically impactful to my family. You know what I'm saying? So when I look at, the things that are going on, and when we talk about social activism, there's a certain price that goes along with that activism, whether it be you being ostracized from what you're capable of doing, or it being you not having a platform to speak from. And I think that's the biggest part in this American culture is silencing. Let's silence that voice.
Especially with where the NBA is now
on
issues of social justice and political activism. Do you think that, number one, that it's a little bit hypocritical in the way that you've been treated? And number two, are you owed an apology?
And even from that standpoint, what I look at is where we are in the moment. I try my best, brothers, to just stay in the moment on things and don't get caught looking too far back and beating your own drum or any of that. But for me, it's what opportunities do we have? When you look at the National Basketball Association and the millionaires, you consider LeBron James as a billionaire, okay? How do we see ourselves in the situation that we're in this country? Just from the NBA end. It sickens me because I feel like greed is rampant, that how many millions is enough million for me and my family and generation? We know, but once again, the images and the models that are placed in front of young athletes and entertainers are those that are really untouchable unless you're a God-gifted talent and you can't. See, and that's another thing about you can have a God-given talent, but you have to have a way to get your talent to the marketplace. And that's the stickler for the African-American community. That's the agency. So the agents have such a big impact in whether or not things go well. So I applaud LeBron on him having his homeboy that he grew up with as his agent. But at the same time, what are we doing? You know what I'm saying? So when I look at the committee that the NBA set up for whatever it is, social justice or whatever it is, and you don't call Hodge or Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, what good are you? So and that's another thing. How can you impact something that you don't know anything about? So if I've never faced racism, I've never been whiteballed, I've never been ostracized, so how can I speak to that condition and then be able to bring about solutions to it? Do they owe me an apology? I don't want the apology because I understand the reality of karma. I understand the reality that, what I did was I didn't do anything wrong. And, they ostracized my son. My son was one of the best players in America. He can shoot the ball. To me, Steph can shoot it. My son shoot just as well as Steph and taller and bigger. So it was one of those things. For me, what happened in his career, that he had to go abroad to do his thing. But for him, it was the best thing that happened. He met his wife there. So, I got grandbabies who are Greek.
So you kind of alluded to this time after your playing days in the NBA. What was that transition to being a basketball player kind of internationally?
Well, one of the things was, for me, I didn't really want to go overseas to play basketball, to be quite honest with you, man. I loved the competition. And I think, as much as the bread for me, I didn't really even, quite honestly, I didn't think about the bread till the bread was gone. I was more into, I wanted to see where I fit with Isaiah, Mark Price, Mark Jackson's, where was my skill set in as far as getting my game to that supreme level. Not realizing that what I said and what I did was going to, shut that short. But at the same time, I know I could still play basketball, I still love the game. So it was actually the Phoenix Suns who told me I should go overseas and let them know that I could still play, which was funny to me. It's only been a couple months, man. So I go overseas, and I averaged probably close to 30 points a game in probably a month and a half, and I come back here, and nobody would even talk to me. And it was one of those things. At that point in time, I talked to Tex Winter, who was still coaching in the league at the time, and he told me at that point, I think it's important that you go ahead and start thinking about coaching the game because you have a lot to give to the game in that manner. So it was at that point that I knew that, it was about my sons who were, freshmen and sophomore in high school, that now I got to make sure I'm on top of them to get them the opportunities that they deserve in their lives, even if it's not from an economic level, if it's just from a support in and being able to sit here and, hey, man, and believe me, my sons chop me up. And I love it because it's one of those things that you're not holding it aside and you're not taking it out on somebody else. So if I'm the focal point of why you're upset, holler at me about it and we'll get through it. But, I think that's one of the biggest things for me was the realization that, that I looked at my historical record. And what happened to me happened to better athletes and better entertainers than myself. So I'm part of that fabric. But the main thing is to stay in the moment and keep pushing. And I think that's the thing that, we talked about Long Beach State and the basketball, but, the foundational for me was the Black Studies, and the historical perspective and, the ancestral legacy that bolsters you during those dark times, during those periods of challenges where I know that, I should still be hooping, but I'm not. So what am I going to do? What would my ancestors do? Get up and keep pushing, boy. Raise them boys and keep stepping.